Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Tanya, and I'll be moderating our webinar today. And this session will consist of a 30-minute presentation and 15 minutes for any questions submitted via chat. And now, further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Jobvite's very own Director of Information Security, Kimberly Smathers.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm really glad that you could join me because I love talking about data privacy, which a lot of people find odd, but it's a passion for me here at Jobvite. So I'm happy to have the conversation with you this morning. We're going to talk about how your HR technology can actually be putting data at risk, and a lot of folks that I've talked to are unaware of it, which was the inception and the thinking to have this webinar. So hopefully it will help you out, and I can answer any questions you have at the end, although I wish we could do interrupt driven because I love that, but apparently we can't do that in this format. We're going to talk about, we're going to look back, give a quick look back at 2016 because a lot of interesting things have been happening in the last couple of years, and they definitely bear looking at because they explain a lot about where we are today. I'm going to do a brief overview of what is PII, and probably a lot of you already know that, but I thought I'd touch there because some folks actually don't, and it's always useful just to talk about what we're really looking at. I'm going to give a drop into why that data is so interesting to cyber thieves, especially lately, and how we got there. We'll talk about SOC 2 compliance. But at the last minute when I was doing this deck so that we could have this chat, I had to add in EU data privacy because so many of you have been dealing with it. And there are some recent changes that, believe me, I'm seeing on this end because I'm getting a lot of requests. So I thought we'd talk about that just for a few minutes and see if there are questions on that because I get a lot of those as well. And as I said, it's changing also. So that's a really big number I just popped up on the screen. That's 6 billion. And that's actually the number of records that were stolen in 2016 alone. So 6 billion records, which is an astonishing number because you think, well, I don't hear a lot about that. But 6 billion makes up the number that was stolen from everywhere, right? So every reported cyber theft of PII can range from, if, say, I get to a healthcare company, I might get 10 million records. Actually, sometimes more, right? So if you think about healthcare companies, I get 10 million records at one stop. So each of the data privacy breaches that get reported can range from, hey, it was 150 records to, well, it was actually 5 million or so. So that number is actually going up every year, and there's a really good reason for that. So let's talk about why that's happening here in 2016. When we look at PII, the reason that things are changing a little in the market is there are a couple things that come together that make this actually possible for cyber criminals. Number one, the number one thing in here, and I'm going to hopefully not scare you too much here, is that as we have moved into cloud technology, and that's been kind of a slow thing, when say over the last 5 to 8 years, more and more companies are going to cloud-based technologies, and more of the services, the ATS services, the recruiting platforms, our financial stuff, our HR, are actually all in the cloud. So when we go to buy those things, we have to go through the process of saying, well, our data is going to be in the cloud. How safe is it? So we go through the process where your folks end up talking to people like me. I explain our controls and so forth. But overall, what that means in our market is more and more of PII is being moved to the cloud, right? So initially, when we started out with the notion of identity theft, and we're talking 15 years ago, right? This kind of started to get out in the market. You started seeing CyberLock, LifeLock, all these things that say, hey, if you work with us, pay us $10 a month, we'll take care of making sure that no one's after your data. Because people were stealing PII directly from you, directly from me, but at the individual level. Didn't make them a lot of money because it was hit or miss. You might get somebody that you could get a lot of money out of depending on their credit score. You might get somebody that you couldn't. So it's kind of a hit or miss thing. But as we've moved PII to the cloud, the number of records I can get if I can break into one of these databases becomes exponentially larger. So if I think about that at the ATS level or the healthcare or a financial services company or any number of companies that collect this data, if I go after the data that's in the cloud, I'm going to get a lot more of it, and it makes the effort that I put into it pay me a lot more if I'm a cyber criminal. So you got to ask yourself, what is this data that people are after, and why are they after it? So PII is information that can actually identify a specific individual. It can distinguish or trace an identity based on name, social security number, biometrics. But if it comes right down to it, a very simple explanation of it, especially in relation to HR data, is that if you have a database that has a combination of a first name, a last name, a physical address, an email address or telephone number, that data in combination in the same spot represents PII because it represents and can identify a specific individual, which means I, as a cyber criminal, now have the ability to at least get part of what I need when I'm trying to go be you, right? I have information about your date of birth. I might have your mom's maiden name. I may have enough to spoof and start acting like you, setting up accounts and saying I've got enough information to start monkeying with that, and I might be able to get somewhere. But if I have PII, maybe non-sensitive PII, which is pretty important stuff, I can probably start looking for those social security numbers or other identifying factors that will allow me to do a lot more. So PII, again, it's the combination of a bunch of things. It could be as much as just an email address, driver's license number, all the things that we might find in an HR system, right? An HR system is uniquely set up to have most of the stuff that a cyber criminal wants because it's got first name, last name, I-9 information, and the social security number. It's a gold mine because if I want to get data that I can use to be someone else, the HR system is going to have every key piece that I need. Funny enough, a lot of people, when I ask them, what is the most stolen type of information that a cyber criminal wants, a lot of folks will immediately respond to me and go, it's financial information, it's credit information, because obviously that's where the money is, right? But if you think about that data for a minute, one of the things that immediately becomes clear is that your bank and your financial institution is actually tracking access to that fairly closely. And as soon as there's a hit on it that they don't think there should be, even when you're out shopping, if you happen to be in another state and you're traveling, you go to buy something, your bank calls you and says, hey, where are you, right? And they say, wait, we shut your card down for the moment, where are you? And you get irritated, but then you think, hey, this is good stuff. So when I steal, if I'm a cyber criminal and I steal that credit card or financial information, it's almost a one-shot deal for me. I'm going to be able to use it once and it's over, and I might not even get that once. It might be blocked before I can complete it. So financial data, while it's interesting to somebody in cyber theft, on the black market, if you go on the black web, you'll see that financial records, they go for about $5 a pop, so $5 per each record, right? PII is at $50 a record, and it's going up. The last time I checked, when I went out into the black web, being very careful, but I went and took a look, I saw $62 a record about a week ago. So you can see that PII is definitely getting a lot of leverage right now. And the reason for that is that I can use PII to actually be you, go take credit out in your name, and so on. One of the things that I wanted to share with you, though, and if you look at this particular chart, you're going to see that the breaches by type, over on the right-hand side of the screen, you see PII at 34%, which is the largest chunk of our pie, and you think, wow, that's a lot. But when you look on the left side of this particular chart, you'll see that we have PII plus payment card data at 3%, financial plus health plus PII at 4%. Education data plus PII, 4%. Credentials plus PII, 4%. And then at the bottom, there's financial plus PII at 8%, and then healthcare data plus PII at 13%. PII is king right now. That's what everybody wants. These statistics are from 2016. They have increased, I believe the last time I looked, it was a 35% jump over last year, and it's been going up exponentially since about 2013, as there's been a shift again towards the gathering or the ability to get multiple large numbers of these records at once by going after these cloud-type storage systems that, again, for a healthcare perspective, a financial services company, HR, and again the ATS, which is usually tied to HR, this makes this a gold mine if someone can get into your ATS system. So the security of these systems has become more and more important, and it's one of the things that we're getting smarter about, but I still talk to people who I have to explain a lot of this to, which again, I'm happy to, because I'm after this every day in the work I do here at Jobvite. But the targeting of individual identities and the personal information exposure just shows how valuable the information has become, right? Because with PII, again, I can apply for a line of credit in your name. I can purchase property, commit fraud. It is something that doesn't get immediately noticed. You may have credit monitoring on your credit report, but a lot of people don't, actually. And although I would say that it's a great idea to have it, I think it's a couple of bucks a month. Large quantities of PII are actually in poorly secured environments and systems right now. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that without getting too crazy technical with you. And when we get to the end of the deck, I want to talk about the differences between environments that we can store this in. But when you go to using, say, an ATS system or an HR system with PII, a lot of people wonder about who's actually responsible for the data in those environments. So you think to yourself, well, first of all, one of the responsibilities you have as the individual organization that is actually the controller of that data, your organization is the owner of that data. And it is incumbent upon you actually to find out prior to moving the data anywhere whether or not the controls in the environment you're going to move it to are adequate. And so that requires a little bit of technical knowledge, but I think it's actually more important to ask the right questions about where the data is going, because your organization is responsible for knowing about that in the event of a data breach. So it does become important and incumbent upon you as the organization who's responsible ultimately for that data to know where it's being stored, how it's being stored, and how it is secured and protected, because in the event of a data breach, those are the questions that you as an organization would be asked. So it's very important to make sure in the systems or the services that we choose to make sure that we have the right controls in place and we're working with a vendor that can be trusted and can show that and prove to you that they have those controls in place. The same is true for EU data privacy. And when we talk about EU data privacy, there's so much we could talk about, right? So any organization that receives an application from someone in Europe and potentially will hire someone in Europe or the UK has got to deal with, and you probably know this already, you guys are dealing with the fallout from losing safe harbor. So safe harbor, a lot of you probably already know, last year in October, the safe harbor was negated, right? We had the court case in the EU, and it was judged by the court to be non-applicable when it came to protecting the data of citizens who reside in the EU, and the UK uses it as well. So during that time, after they negated it, there was just sort of this, people were scrambling trying to figure out what to do, because for a couple of minutes there it was illegal for anyone to transmit or transfer data about EU citizens from anywhere in the European Union to anywhere in the U.S., because the U.S. was judged to not be in compliance with EU's data privacy directive. So initially, and I actually put together the model clauses. You may be familiar with those. The model clauses are simply about 8 to 10 pages that we added to our contract that outline the requirements that we have to adhere to in order to be a data processor of data coming from the EU. So customers of Jobvite, in Jobvite's case, I'm pretty sure everyone may have done it the same way, but in Jobvite's case, customers that were going to be transferring data simply added the standard contractual model clauses as defined by the EU Data Privacy Authority. We added those to our MSA and signed those agreements in order to be in compliance and within the law in order to transfer the data based on EU citizenship to the U.S. So we were fine with that until this year. As you know, if you've been following this at all, the Privacy Shield requirements and the Privacy Shield certification came into effect. Jobvite certified to Privacy Shield. But if you know anything about this and you're dealing with it, you also know that the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, also now has come into play. So any one of our customers that certified Privacy Shield as a data controller now has to do something called the Onward Transfer Agreement, and they are required to do that to any service provider that they are transferring EU citizens PII to. So they're required by law to enter into an additional agreement called Onward Transfer. So right now I'm dealing with that piece of it because any of you who are doing this are going to, by law, have to get this agreement in place with any service provider that you transfer data to as a data processor, which is all, I know, very confusing, lots of terminology. It's fairly easy to understand if you do it all the time, and I know some of you do. But if you don't, just as an HR person or someone who only deals with the HR aspect of it, when you're looking at a provider, you have to say to yourself, well, we do have applicants coming out of the EU, and just let your service providers actually give you the information that you need. Just be familiar enough with it to understand what it is that you have to deal with. And then your service provider, like Jobvite does, we can get you the data that you need. We can get you the agreements that you need. Because obviously we have to do it in many times over, and we're always happy to help with that. So you can set up time with security and compliance here at Jobvite if you need to, or talk to other vendors about it, and I'm sure that they too are going to know it. At this point, I'm sure you're asking yourself, well, if cloud providers are the reason that this data is suddenly in large quantities available, is any HR platform secure? And the answer is, yeah, probably, but I think what I would say is that your security strategy is where you put this in play, right? So if I had a security strategy that I was trying to think about in terms of the vendors that I had, the first thing I would do is understand, where does all my PII go? Because it's, again, incumbent upon you as the data owner and the person in the organization that's responsible for the data. You need to know where all that data is. That's your responsibility, is understanding where is all the data. So I would be looking to implement solutions with vendors when it comes to cloud security or cloud type implementations and services. I'd be asking a lot of questions from those providers to make sure that they could actually meet the requirements of my organization, and I would work with my security team to understand what those requirements would be. Your security and compliance teams would know that. If you don't have a security and compliance team, and some smaller organizations don't, it's usually your IT person, and they can tell you what it is that you need to have as minimum requirements. And then start asking a lot of questions around authentication and access, encryption, and how we manage keys. And I can tell you that from my own perspective and my own opinion on this, you almost have to expect data breach. And you probably say to yourself, what? Really? No. And actually what I would tell you is yes. The smartest security people are working on the theory that there will be a breach, and I operate that way. So what I do with the data is, yeah, do I not do anything at the perimeter? Absolutely, I'm doing everything at the perimeter. I have IDS, intrusion detection systems, web application firewalls, filtering, SIEM systems. I have all of those tools in place. Absolutely, I do, and I pay a lot of attention to them. But I pay more attention to the data, making sure the data is encrypted at a great standard for data encryption. I use a really great key management system, and anybody who wants more information on that, I can get it for you. The key management system is the absolute most important piece when I look at the data. I make sure that our keys are rotated quarterly. We don't keep the same keys in there all the time. The only access to the data is actually through the API. Users can't access the data, which is really important. In addition to that, if there was a data breach and it was successful, no one is going to be able to do anything with the data because the data is encrypted and can be only decrypted via the API, which guess what? You can't hijack and take somewhere else. So you want to make sure that the service providers that you're using, access, authentication, encryption, and key management are the four major principles and columns that I would say are where the security of the data is most important. It's how I say we expect a breach. It's how I can tell you that if there was one, your data's not going anywhere and no one is going to be able to use it or sell it on the black market. My whole approach to it is to act as if it's going to happen, and I think that that's the smartest approach that we could have for it. When I think about questions that you might want to ask your providers, first of all, where is the PII stored? That's going to be important in terms of what you have to do for EU data privacy, because if it's stored in the United States, and Jobvite currently stores it in the United States, although I can share a little roadmap secret with you, I've recommended strongly that we put our DR in Ireland or Germany, because guess what? Then we will have the ability to tell our EU customers who have applicants from the EU that we're not moving it to the United States and we're not going to have to deal with all of these extra agreements. That's an important piece right there. So that's a good thing to share. But right now all the PII is in the United States. But one of the things that I would tell you is super important in the United States is SOC 2 certification. If you're not familiar with SOC 2, it's Security Operations Controls is what the SOC thing stands for. And it's based on the principles that are laid out in there for security, privacy, confidentiality, integrity, and authentication. So in the case of services that use or are hosted in AWS, like Jobvite is, and like many other providers are, they're hosted in ATS, the first thing that you want to talk about with SOC 2 certification is your data center SOC 2 certified? And AWS is SOC 2 certified. They can provide you with that report. The problem with that SOC 2 report from the data center is this. Let's take a look over here, and I can tell you that when we look at the AWS SOC 2 certification, on the bottom of the screen, right, you see the orange hexagons, and they show what the AWS SOC 2 certification covers. So any of your providers that can get you a SOC 2 from AWS or from about their infrastructure, their physical data center, they're protecting those three things. Most important when we're thinking about data privacy is whether or not the provider can show you an additional SOC 2 report that is specific to your application, your data, and the platform, because that means that that's been audited. And they look at the encryption, they look at the authentication, they look at all the controls for the security of the platform, the data processing, the data encryption, and the data storage. So if you're looking at a vendor who can't provide that second SOC 2, I would look elsewhere, because you want to get all of it. You should be getting 2 SOC 2 reports from any vendor that's hosted in AWS, in Azure, or anything that's not hosted by the vendor. One of the other ATS vendors in our space shows a certification, a SOC 2, for their data center. They don't host outside, so it's to their data center. But again, the question is, do you have a SOC 2 for your platform, your application, and your data storage? Very important question to ask. Other questions I would ask, and most people are going to, and most organizations are ultimately going to be able to provide this to you. I'm not sure if everyone's done this. I know Jobvite has. But the Privacy Shield certification is an important one as well when we're thinking about the privacy requirements for EU data privacy. So moving through that, are we at question and answer? Have I talked too long again?
Yes, to the next one.
Okay. I always talk too long. I could go on about this all day. But I would tell you this much before I jump off into question and answer land. When it comes to Jobvite, I am absolutely passionate about this in the background. And any of you can feel free to email me, I don't mind, to talk about data privacy because, again, it's my passion. Security is my passion. So I'm happy to share Jobvite information because I'm very proud of it. So I'm going to go right now into QA and let anybody ask questions if they want to right now. And I think, Tanya, I have to work with you on that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we already have a couple questions.
Okay.
And again, please feel free to send your questions in via chat to me, and we can get these over to Kim. But the first question is, how do you know if there is a data breach?
Well, as I said, I'm really glad you asked that. So at Jobvite anyway, and I don't know how others do it, but at Jobvite, I was able to communicate to our management, our senior management here, about the unbelievable importance of privacy and security to our customers. And I was able to implement a suite of tools that goes across the environment all the way from the perimeter in. I have controls and information that come to me in the format of alerts and alarms. I know about every bit of traffic that comes into this environment. I know at my WAF level, at the Web Application Firewall, everything that's trying to get to my application. I can see any bad attempts to the application and drop them before they're successful. I can see brute force attempts, all of it. And then if someone was actually able to get by this, when they got to what we call the encryption vault, which is where the PII resides, if someone's trying to get in there, it will immediately alarm. I'll go back to what I said about the API being the only, this is the application programming interface, is the only thing that can access the data. If a user account is trying to, it shuts down immediately. So I've got a lot of information that tells me, and I monitor, and beyond that, logging is reviewed every day to see who's accessing the database. So quite frankly, I'm not going to say it can't be done, but it can't be done without my knowledge.
Okay, and I guess this would be considered kind of a follow-up, but what happens if there is a data breach, and who's responsible for the data that's stolen?
Ultimately, the organization that the data belongs to has a responsibility to it. Just like with AWS to Jobvite, Jobvite has a shared responsibility model with its customers. Our customers have their own portals, wherein once the portal is put up for your career websites, you add users to it and you manage the users from your organization that have access to the data. But ultimately, the owner of the data is your organization. If there was a data breach, Jobvite is, and it says so in our contract, we are required to work with you to deal with the data breach if it were to occur, to notify customers and to talk to you and inform you about what the legal requirements are to follow up on that data breach. And we're required to give you root cause analysis and talk to you about next steps. That's never happened at Jobvite. I want to point that out, which is a great thing that we can say about our environment. There has never been a data breach here.
Okay, great. And I know you touched a little bit on this, but we got a question about EU data storage. So is it okay to store data from applicants in the EU in systems in the U.S.?
Actually, right now it is. And again, I'm going to go back to the model clauses were what were in place. First, Safe Harbor made it okay. And that agreement said that anybody who certified the Safe Harbor would adhere to the compliance requirements for EU data privacy. Then the model clauses, and we used those as well, and then it went on from there to Privacy Shield, and now we're dealing again with those pesky onward transfer agreements. But yes, right now it is absolutely legal to store it. You just have to make sure, and your legal teams would be right on this, I know it, because I always end up talking to the legal teams, that we would, all your vendors would have to have the right certifications and the right stuff in place in order for you to be able to use us with that data. But if you didn't know and you need some advice or some direction on that, I'm always happy to help in that department.
Okay, so it looks like all the questions have been answered. even after the end of this presentation, feel free to reach out to myself or Kim. We will be sending out information and follow-up emails. I do want to share one thing as a little bit of housekeeping, but Jobvite will be out in the Boston area, so if you're in the Boston area or you have colleagues that might be interested in coming to chat live with our Jobvite folks, feel free to pass this information on to them, and again, you'll be getting an email with all this information. But it looks like we're all done with questions, and Kim, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I'd just point out, since the Boston Lunch and Learn is about healthcare recruiting, again, I'm going to go back to healthcare, PII, ODEX tracked it for cyber criminals. So just point that out again. I can't stop. What can I say? I'm really glad I got to talk to all of you today, and I encourage you, if you want to talk to me, shoot me an email. I'm always glad to get it, and I will absolutely respond to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Kim, for taking the time to chat, and thank you, everyone who attended. Like I said, we'll be following up with some information via email, so keep a heads up for that. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.